Okay, well, it's great to be here. Great to see such a good turnout. You probably guessed already I'm from the UK office. The Newbury office, in fact, just down the road from the building that you know as Downton Abbey. And I've been working with Ian, who will be up later, to really focus on some work we were doing at eXain that's now coming out as eGain CJA. And also, how that links with the traditional eGain product set. And we think it's a pretty exciting offer. So after these presentations earlier, I was thinking, the only way we could take this forward is if we make it easy for you, right? We'll make it easy for you to get this presentation. So, okay, I'll do my best. So I'm going to start with a story. This is about, it's a true story. It's about a guy called Matthew Mowry, who was in the US Navy. And he joined as a seaman, but he broke his leg and evidently couldn't keep on the ship, so they sent him back to land. And he spent his time making a nuisance of himself. He's obviously cantankerous and opinionated, which is why I like him. And so he spent a lot of time writing newspaper articles about what the Navy was doing wrong and all the things they should improve, and they were on a very wide variety of topics. And then I think the Navy got fed up with this because they posted him to the US Observatory, where he was basically at a desk job, which was probably looking very boring. But he didn't waste his time, and he found that there was this enormous resource in the observatory, which was all of the logs that the captains had kept of their various journeys around the world. And over 35 million of these, and they were about to destroy them. They were going to throw them away. Huge, big data resource, about to be destroyed because they couldn't figure out what to do with it. So he got his staff to create the world's first map of currents and winds around the Earth, so that shipping could be improved, so it could be optimized, so people could take their ships down the best route for their journey. And prior to this, almost all innovation in shipping was faster boats. Well, faster boats, it makes a big difference, but actually having these maps and heading in the right way made a very much bigger difference. So back in 1860, just 2 million and 10 million for Britain. We had more ships in those days. But in today's money, that's $500 million for the US, I think. So that's a huge difference. And to give you an example, one of the first users of these maps was a guy who took a ship from Baltimore down to Rio, and he shaved 10 days off the usual return trip, the time for that journey, because he used the information on the maps. Okay, so the point of all of this is a sort of pointer to the problem we're trying to solve with customer journeys. We're trying to come up with the maps that make it obvious to us where people are headed, what the best paths for people should be for any given journey, and therefore how to optimize the entire shipping fleet. So what do those maps look like? Well, there are a few features that we have to have on, right? Obviously, we don't necessarily need landmass, but we do care about customer intent, the channels that customers can use to execute their journeys. We care about the patterns of behavior, the chosen paths, the desire lines that we see in the behavior of our customers. And we care about certain outcomes, so the signatures of failure, like going to a search box or contact us page, or abandoning in queue. So, that's one set of features we care about. The other thing that we need, is rather like the contours or isobars on a conventional map. We need to see the KPIs that are associated, the things that guide us as to which are the steep hills and which are the easy journeys. And, key amongst those, as we've heard today, customer effort. But, I think in general, these are the three things we care about: value, cost, and effort. Now, when we start to talk about those things, I think we've all seen these sorts of diagrams. I've used them myself in previous presentations. This is a marketing view. This is not a real-world view. This is an idealized model of a customer journey. And the truth of customer journeys is they are messy, and there is a lot of data. So, for the great many websites out there with billions of events per month, many contact centers with, millions of calls every month. And actually, we've dealt with that big data for a while, but this is, slightly different because, we're talking about streams of events across different channels and how those can be fit together to give a sort of coherent picture of, what that journey looks like for any individual customer. And then we have to be concerned with the fact that not all journeys are equal. Not all of them matter the same amount to us. Emotionally, we know some things we try to get done. We want to, my favorite example is my credit card's been stolen. How you react to that as a credit card vendor is going to be very telling. I'm with Amex still because they handled that when it happened to me really well. They dealt with the fraudulent transactions, they disappeared, and it really was a really easy experience for us. So, that's key. I think, people will recognize in general that each industry has a different set of significant journeys. So, I've mentioned, the stolen card scenario. These are just from a McKinsey study. I think what I'm finding is each customer I talk to, each customer organization that I talk to as an eGain person, can quickly tell me they've got 2 or 3 journeys that they've got problems with. And that becomes a sort of focus. And those journeys, they might have problems within the channel, across channel, or just in general their competence around delivering those journeys. So, this points to an approach which you'll see, we are proposing, which is an incremental approach around the key journeys you have and taking those forward. So, mapping customer journeys in the real world with the big data and the billions of events, what does that look like? Well, I've given you some screenshots here. These are real. We can demo this outside if people are interested in taking a more detailed look. I hope they are. These are about flows and patterns. This is not pie charts and graphs. We do pie charts and graphs, and tables of data. That's great. But, a big part of the map here is, describing the flow of things, and describing the flow of things in a way that has meaning because we've classified those things. So, the classification we might be talking about here is high effort or low effort. To give a simple example, we're classifying based on customer mission. The customer was trying to top up their mobile phone. We can detect that, from the type of events we see, be it on the CVP or IVR, or it could be on the web, or it could be, in the UK through an ATM. It doesn't matter. We can look at that event and we can say, in this case, the customer's trying to top up their mobile phone, and there are many other examples for different industries. Then we can also classify by the content of the interaction. So, good examples of this, which I think Ian will talk to in a moment, include the sort of chat sessions and picking out, noun phrases and other things that indicate the meaning of them, grouping together collections of web pages to indicate that collectively these have some common theme. Maybe they're part of the product catalog for shoes, or they're, as you'll see in our Purple Nile demo. Also, we need to look for, the things that tell us about the customer. Because if we're to serve customers well, we need to understand the customer in terms of, not just demographics, but also, their persona and behavior. And, what we're already finding, I think, is you quickly arrive at the signatures of intent that also relate to a particular persona and, a customer who's trying to achieve an outcome. We worry about the signatures of failure and success. So I talked about going to the search box on a website, and there's lots of other ones, zeroing out on your IVR out of frustration after waiting for 3 minutes. There's many other things you do, and each of those actually are unique to the specifics of the journey. So, to give an example, in general, people are happy to wait longer for a transaction that they expect will take longer. So, if you're booking a holiday, you're expecting that to be a 20-minute call. You don't mind waiting 3 minutes for that. If you just want your account balance, that better be within a few seconds, right? So, and that's sort of intuitively obvious, but it's necessary to look at each journey in terms of classifying it on that basis. Then we get on to the effectiveness of interventions, and I'll talk a bit more about interventions in a moment, but the moment you try to preempt aspects of customer journeys that you want to avoid, or the reverse, you want to reinforce the aspects that are positive, you need to be sure of the effectiveness of that. So, What do I mean by an intervention? I don't mean it's the sales guys in the bar last night and we need to stop them. What I mean is that there is a mission going wrong. You know, it's the simplest example of something that's going wrong is I abandoned the cart on my e-commerce. But there's so many different services that we offer end users, and whenever they go wrong, you know, we should treat that as a problem. So an intervention is simply putting the help that stops that, perhaps deflecting to a more expensive channel, causing frustration, increasing effort, you know, resulting in you know, much longer time to serve, perhaps, or longer time to resolution of the customer's issue. And interventions might take place in any of our channels. So, you know, we can, using the eGain offers engine, we're going to talk to this in a minute, we can place chat sessions at the appropriate point on the website. If we find that through CGA, we know how to respond to that problem. In fact, actually, that whole model is a good way to instrument the digital channel and, you know, to provide a kind of virtuous reinforcement of what's good and bad about that channel. You know, we can put a chat out there because we're not quite sure why we're seeing what we're seeing, and we can ask people. And once we know what it is, we can then put in maybe a knowledge article that deals with that problem so it doesn't become a call to the contact center. Then later, perhaps IT will have finished improving the website so the problem goes away. But you know, during the period you're waiting for that to happen, and these things can't happen immediately, the combination of CGA and offers is a very flexible way, a very responsive way of dealing with those, you know, day-to-day emergencies, right? Using the Vim intervention engine, we can also take steps to prevent poor outcomes in the contact center. So where we're able to trace customer activity from the web to a voice call, we can also take steps to treat that call in an appropriate fashion. And offers, you know, need to be appropriate in the sense that, you know, they're effective, they're cost-effective, and, you know, they generally lower the customer effort that we're concerned about. So final point here about interventions here is the A/B testing. So, you know, if we want to become data-driven in how we're dealing with these things, so, you know, there's many modern businesses out there, Google, Amazon, you know, data-driven is the way for a lot of, you know, these thinking. A/B testing is a great way of doing that. So we can have a control group, and we can have the group that we make a particular offer to, and we can even compare two offers. But by taking that sort of approach, we can be sure that what we're doing is appropriate to address the, you know, problem with the customer journey at that point. Now, personas, so I talked a bit about personas earlier, but I want to reinforce that personas are not just demographic groups of customers. Personas are driven, you know, by perhaps demographics, but also behavior. And once you identify personas by their, you know, behavior, intent, and preferences, once we can do that, then we can make a specific offer to those personas. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't offer a cheap upgrade to a customer that's been on high effort for a while, but if you have a persona of somebody with an intention, and, you know, who's addressing the website, or maybe coming through the IVR, trying to find a path to a particular resolution and failing, then you have a systematic approach to treat that by putting in an intervention around that specific persona. Not for everyone, but for the specific persona. So that's key. Okay, so very quick introduction to CJA, and anyone who wants more on this, please come to the demo booth and we can show you real screens and you can get more of a sense of what it's about. But this is the sort of total footprint of what the platform does for you. So we're looking to capture the widest possible array of data that's relevant to the customer journey. So what does that include? Well, it's the web, it's mobile, it's chat, it's email, it's voice calls, it's IVR activity. It could even be, you know, product consumption events, you know, from your mobile phone app. So, you know, there is a very, very generic model for events that can be classified in different ways and that can be used to inform our analysis of the customer journey. When we get into instrumentation, so there are, you know, a few key things there. I talked about customer effort earlier. we have a standard approach to calculating customer effort for a couple of channels. You may have a channel that we haven't thought of yet. So there is a sort of plug-in approach to be able to deal with logic for different channels and be able to calibrate customer effort so that it is a real prediction for survey information, which might be another source of event feeds, by the way, but survey information that they're using to calibrate that customer effort score so it becomes a good predictor of loyalty. And then the other piece there, I mentioned detecting customer missions. That's a key part of what we're doing in the instrumentation piece. So if we see the right patterns of events, we know that a customer is embarked on starting to do something. And they may get all the way through the stages of that mission to conclusion, which is one of the some metrics we look at for different missions. Or they may not, may abandon beforehand, in which case you might have the desire to do something about that. Visualizations, been a few screenshots, there'll be some more, please come to the booth. And they really enable analysis of that pattern and understanding of those personas. And then, when you've formed that view and you've got a map of how customers are behaving, then, you can take the step through offers, through the Vim intervention engine, to take lasting steps to address that without it becoming a cost problem or a sudden spike in call volumes, all of the other things that can be a nightmare for us. Okay, so talking about customer effort, because it's highly relevant. As I say, we calculate this on the way in for different events types. It's really at its most meaningful when you apply it within the context of the individual customer journey. So what do I mean by that? Well, just looking at customer effort against your IVR as the number of button pushes, the amount of time, that's not terribly interesting. But if you can say the customer effort for all customers across all channels in some way trying to top up their mobile phone, to use my earlier example, is going up or down, you can look at the root causes to what's driving that. So it's much more important to look at customer effort through the lens of the customer intent than just in some aggregate way. Looking at the total minutes coming into the call center, that doesn't really tell you much. Looking at the number of transfers, I mean, we care about that, but it doesn't really tell you much about the individual missions. So there has to be a relationship between the customer's intent and how we're looking at customer effort as a proxy for perceived effort. And again, as well as intent, where we can map the identity across different channels, which we have that feature in CJA. So we know that this call relates to that email, relates to this chat session. We can form a more aggregate picture of this one identity, even if we don't know their name, but we know it's an identity, and that individual is attempting things successfully or otherwise. Okay, so Ian, do you want to come up? There you go.
Right. So this part essentially is to, as we were building the products and testing the feature out, we were testing them out on our own website. So as Ashu mentioned, this is essentially going to be a service initially, but we thought it was useful to see what we could learn from our own experience. So what that involved is we needed to install our OneTag product on our website. That's put the one piece of code in one place. It propagates across the whole website. And from that point, we then stream all the navigational data from all the visitors into the cloud. And then we sit down with Simon's toolkit there, the CGA tools, to see if we can understand, first of all, from a macro level, what's going on the website, what are there any systemic issues and so on, and then at a micro level, are there any journeys we want to home in and see if we can influence. So the way we started was by using the basic OneTag just to get some basic information. It would be good to say, right, how many visitors are we getting, compare it with other analytics tools we've got, what pages have got the longest dwell time, which pages have got the highest bounce rate, just compare those with the marketing team. Is that what we're expecting? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And then we go down and look at some trends, where in fact are people accessing our site from? What countries? What times of the day are they coming? How does that vary during the week? Most of our stuff is not interesting. It's just, during the day. It's B2B, so it's not necessarily the most ideal trial vehicle. Most of our people are business customers in North America, Europe, and India, accessing during business hours. So the in-test came as we start to try and drill down into the actual journeys. And as Simon's pointed out, when you look at all the page-to-page transitions, it's massively noisy. It's very hard to pick anything out of it. So the first job was to try and classify them down into groups of pages, and then see if we can drill down further into the sorts of journeys that we might see. So this is sort of working backwards, really, then. So we were then sat down and said, well, we can see certain types of behavior that is repeated quite a lot on the site. So one, for example, we get visitors from certain URLs, and they will go to our careers page. They'd then maybe home in on one job. They'd spend quite a bit of time reading that. Then they would go and look at the products, look at the services, maybe come back to that one job. So that's a repeated pattern, and we could say that seems to fit the idea of somebody looking for a job, not surprisingly, but maybe looking for that job. So we called that persona the job seeker. Another one is one where somebody actually comes in from, again, from another set of URLs. They go to one job, they go to the next job, they go through all the jobs in our careers. They don't look at the products, they don't look at the services. So we kind of think that might be a recruiter, somebody looking to offer us, jobs. So we looked at that, we identified that as a particular type of persona. Others, we saw that people coming to our site would just home in on one product. They look at the product, the solutions, the announcements, spend quite a bit of time on that. So they would look at knowledge, they would look at chat. Others would look at all the products. They would look across the board. And then we see some guys who would come in from a range of interesting-looking URLs, and they wouldn't look at anything to do with the products or services. They would just look at the company information. They would look at the board of directors, look at the results. So we kind of figured that was the persona of someone possibly looking at an investment. And there's a whole raft of other ones we kind of identified sitting down with marketing. And again, quite a discovery. We have our website. We know what we'd like it to do. But this was, again, good evidence that sitting down with a good graphical tool, we could surface these journeys and see what, see whether they made sense. And we also looked at the journeys that happened on chat. As well as looking at the different web journeys, we looked at the journeys that people go through when they click on the click to chat, and they have a chat session with us. Now, obviously, when you're looking web pages, you're going from one page to the next way. There's a kind of sequence there. But with chat, we're having these conversations. So fortunately, we could use some of the items in the CGA toolkit and use something called noun phrase extraction. So we could condense that sentence into a single noun that says what that phrase is about. And again, we can map these out in a kind of journey form, or we could just look at what's going on in terms of the key missions. And you can see there that, in fact, chat itself is our biggest mission. People go to the website, they spend a lot of time on chat, they click to chat, they want to chat about chat. So, however, there were some journeys where the missions were different from the web to the chat. So, for example, a lot of people, now bear in mind, a lot of your chat journeys start where your website is breaking down. So this is good evidence. And what we found is that at least 20% of the chat journeys were asking for pricing information. Now, it's not on the website, so they click to chat and they ask for pricing information. Now, so it happens that we're quite happy with that as an approach. But it does indicate where we also get people coming through the tech support line or partners coming in to try and get that way. So there was a difference in terms of the journeys on different channels. Anyway, we now go from the macro view, working out what's going on, and we're now coming down into the micro view. Which journeys do we want to see if we can influence? So we started to develop those personas in more detail. So the way we could do that was we could say, right, I'm going to name a particular persona. Let's call it the job seeker. I'm going to say he comes from one of these 5 job search URLs, and they're referred in to us. I'm going to look at the countries I'm interested in, maybe the cities, possibly what device they're on, as that, if they're coming on a mobile phone, they might not wish to chat with us. I can then look at the journey details itself. I can look at the time on a page, the time on a group of pages, or I can actually try and pattern match multi-page journeys. So in the case of up there, someone starts at the home page, go to the careers, looks at some of the job pages, then look at the product, then I don't mind where they go, but they come back to the jobs pages, then they can go somewhere else. So that, for us, would indicate this is a strong match with somebody who seems quite keen to get a job. So we tried in our experiment just about 4 interventions, 2 which I'd call early stage in the journey. So that was we had early stage because we didn't have a really strong match with the persona, but we just wanted to see if we could attract their attention quite quickly. There was either a risk of abandonment or maybe an opportunistic offer. So the two we used were the eGain World Prospect. So that's really simple. If you came on our website in the past few weeks from San Jose or a couple of neighboring cities, you would have been said, an invitation, would you like to view the agenda of the eGain World? No more than that, just an out-of-the-box offer, not optimized anyway. And the other one we did was to look at people who've come from an investor URL, and we just say, if you're interested in investing, would you like to see a video of investing with eGain? Only those people get to see it. And we got reasonable results, what we found. The acceptance rate was just a little under 10% of people who accepted that offer, more than I was expecting. I've never accepted an offer, but this was obviously better than that. Interesting that the one I'm showing you on the graphic there, that's the eGain World one. More people tended to ignore that than reject it. It's more of a service offer. Are you interested in this at all? Whereas the investors, again, the same uptake, but more people tended to reject it than ignore it. So they're saying, no, I know what I'm doing, back off, as it were. So that's pretty much in line with what we'd expect in terms of that, and the difference between sales and service offers is the same. We had two, what I call late journey stage offers. We had a couple where the job seeker, for example, they'd met a number of the criteria for being that persona, and so once they'd spent enough time there, quite late in the journey, we would say, would you like to see a video about what it's like to work at eGain? We're keen to get those kind of people on board. And the other one was a chat explorer, which is where someone spent a lot of time looking at chat. And then the best thing to do there is if you're really interested in chat, do you want to have a live demo right now? Not a chat, but a demo with somebody who's a chat specialist. And again, we found, because it was more relevant, we're getting acceptance rates of 20 to 30%, which we found was really good. So where we're working on now, where we're continuing with this experiment, is we will continue to work on the persona refinement. We'll try and drill it more. We'll do some more A/B testing. We'll maybe remove the ignore option and get someone to say, well, are you this persona or not? Just for a small sample of the people. We will look at the web journeys that happen after they've been made an offer. What happens to somebody who rejected an offer? Where does their web journey go? Does that tell us the persona was wrong, or they just didn't want the offer? So same with accept, reject, and ignore. As Simon said, we'll try to link up once someone's had a chat with us. We understand who they are. We can then propagate back that identity across other web visits. Next things we're working on as we develop the service will be able to cache the data from previous journeys and external systems. And for us, the next thing is going to be really interesting. We're going to start to extend the pilot work onto the eGain support pages, because this gives us a whole different list of things to do. When you come to eGain support portal, you log in, so we know quite a lot about you. It'll be much easier to get a relevant targeted offer. It also means that the types of intervention are probably going to be more sophisticated. It's going to involve guided help. It's going to involve putting a complex knowledge-based article to guide you step by step how to do something. And also, it's going to allow us to test out what happens when you start in a web app and then go to the web. So we'll be able to judge the success of the web app. So I leave you 10 minutes, Simon. Thank you. I'll try and do this again. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ian. Okay, so I said we're going to try and make this easy for you. So here's the journey we think we want to embark on with our customers. Our omni-channel journey. So, an initial focus, because, we're building this out as we go to some extent, is around digital transformation. And we want to help you get the kind of interventions and the analysis that Ian was just talking to, but also to understand where other aspects of the eGain platform you may already have can be used more appropriately, more effectively, add more value. Then we want to move you to look at voice as well. Obviously, as an ex-E guy, voice is where I came from in the first place. But I think for, to expand the footprint to include an omni-channel view of the world, and then, finally to reach out to any other channels, retail, other aspects of your world that you put value on including in the model of the journey. And I think eGain can make it easy for you, for these reasons, for the reason that, we already have the ability to capture data with, with the Vim product, with the OneTag product, with the eGain platform itself. We have the tools to integrate that data into journeys, to allow classification in the way that's going to make the most sense for you, and we have the skills to help you figure that out. In terms of interventions, we've got, I think, the broadest possible offer. Guided help. These are different things that, to some extent, Ian's talked to you will have seen from eGain in the past. And I've mentioned the Vim intervention engine, which is, for old-time Vim customers, service management. So that is an ability to interact with, particularly the Cisco platform, but also other IVR and so on during call setup, so that the treatment that makes sense for that journey, for that persona, can be put in place by the routing platform. So that is a low-risk way to go forward, and it's even lower risk than that because we want to do it for you without charge to prove that it works. Proof of value for a couple of weeks of data. Obviously, we need your commitment to help get the integration. But if we take a limited number of free slots, so those of you interested, contact your representative, come and see me, talk to Ian, and we can figure out a good on-ramp for you to take advantage of this service. And we're very confident that it's going to result in benefits. So this is a sort of limited range of offers, really, to get customers on and to show the value to them. And also to get charter status. You can influence us. Okay. I think that's it.